It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about the California State Athletic Commission's big meeting yesterday that saw them throw the full weight and heft of their support behind TKO's Ali Act bill proposal, otherwise known as the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. It is not a good thing, despite Muhammad Ali's name being attached to it. Don't get it twisted. We are also going to look at some new information that was revealed during a research article that Abraham Gonzalez put out. And so we're going to look at the new information that was revealed because it is also bad. It is about Zuffa Boxing's contract. So we're going to look at that as well. But if you want access to all of this stuff, please get yourself a paid subscription because some of this will be behind a paywall. Now, John, how the heck are you? Because I know that you were so disappointed yesterday, like so many of us.
Well, I'm not bad. My phone blew up today. I was at work today, and I just realized I have a ton of missed calls. I took one from you, though, but I have a ton of missed calls from a bunch of people's names they'd recognize in the industry. So I'll mean to get back to a lot of them, I guess, but I am doing fairly good considering what happened yesterday, considering the fact that I have a terrible cough. Let's see if that'll hold up. I am very congested today. And I am praying that I can make it through the show without hacking along.
Well, we'll understand if you end up hacking up along, we'll understand and we'll help you sweep it up and put it back.
I have someone here that's gonna just munch down on the lung if I hack one up right now, so I'm not too concerned.
Isla the kitty is she's missing John because he's been at the office every day this week, and that is unusual because he hasn't had to do that yet, and so she has been missing him a whole heck of a lot. I know all of our listeners already know who Isla the kitty is, so
yeah, it's the woman that controls my life more than any other woman.
The one that likes to dance across your keyboard and mute us all the time.
Yeah, she has new strategies to screw up the show. Don't believe me.
All right. Well, we should get down to brass tacks. And the first topic, obviously, the California State Athletic Commission voted 6-0 unanimously to endorse the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. There were calls of support. There were calls of dissent. What were your big takeaways from the calls that were coming in?
Well, I guess the first was the surprise, or I guess it was surprise. It wasn't quite ready, of how many people the UFC had lined up, or TKO, I use the UFC, but it's really TKO, lined up on the calls. And obviously the TKO lined them up because we had Nick Khan as the very first caller. We had a doctor from the UFC. We had Forrest Griffin on the line. We had just a long list of people that were involved, connected to the UFC, and the majority of the early calls were all from them. So they had been put on wait. I'm not sure how, had they been waiting that long? Did they call them that early, or were they given prime real estate on the call lines to wait ahead of everybody else? But they were there, so they had obviously sent out the message and got a lot of their people, connected them onto the phone call in support of this bill. And that was somewhat surprising. And the other big surprise on the phone call was the lack of people involved with boxing calling against the Ali Act. Now, some of the phone calls I got today were from people, and text messages were from people in the industry who, according to them, were not really aware of this meeting because they had assumed it was going to be in December because that was what was announced at the last meeting, that they were going to do a fact-finding mission and then come back in December. And then we have a video to do today from Oscar De La Hoya, where he said the same thing, that he was not aware. I'm not certain if that's true or not, but he says he was not aware. But I've got other people in the boxing industry saying the same thing. I think they were a little caught off guard. Some of them had stuff to do at that time and were not available, where obviously Nick Khan and the UFC, again, I say the UFC, but I mean TKO, they saw this as important enough that they rushed the troops out to be on this call. And to show how important, again, it is for them, is that they had Nick freaking Khan on the call. I was somewhat surprised they didn't have just a bunch of AstroTurfers, just a bunch of people you wouldn't recognize their names coming and calling in support, but they pulled out the big guns. And that probably was what caught me most off guard, is who was there in support this time for TKO. Last time they had no one basically calling in support of them, and who was not there on the behalf of boxers.
How prepared were the folks from TKO in comparison to the people that called with dissenting opinions?
Well, I mean, obviously they were all on the same page. They had a pitch they were making. And that was another thing, is that if you look at what was discussed, what got very little discussion was the UBOs. Mm-hmm. And the UBOs are by far the most important aspect of this bill, which will have the greatest impact on the industry. And that's the thing you'd think that have the most discussion. But what was stressed by all the TKO callers was the health benefits, the additional insurance, I guess the minimum wage increase, the minimum purse increase, the facility, the training facility that UBOs would have to build, the extra, the additional drug testing, as they claim, how much better for the health and safety for boxers this will be. And that's what also the commission members talked about more. And I was very disappointed that no one really delved into the UBO issue, and how the UBOs skirt the protections that the Ali Act was supposed to provide. Instead, they were focused, and these health standards are, these are great. Some of these benefits, these additional benefits are good. And as they said, no one, when they did their fact-finding mission, although who do they talk to is the big question. Who were they doing fact-finding with? Who were they having meetings with? When they did it, they said no one was against those benefits, the additional, the raised minimum purse, a national minimum purse, and additional insurance. But the part that people had disagreements with, they spent very little time discussing. And you could see that the people that the Zuffa brought in, that the TKO brought in, a lot of them were talking about the medical benefits. They brought in Rudy Moondragon from I think he's from UCLA, might be Loyola Marymount, did a study about the benefits of increasing the minimum purse. And he called and said, I support that portion of the bill. Didn't mention any of the other parts, but I think they brought him in specifically because it gave him coverage. Like, here's someone that did research. He's supporting the bill, even though he was technically saying, I support this aspect. They had the UFC doctor brought in. He talked about how he supports it for the health and safety benefits. Forrest Griffin came in and talked about certain other aspects of it. He thought, I give Forrest credit. He walked a fine line of supporting his company, doing his job, being a good soldier, and at the same time, also only focusing on very specific aspects that I don't think anybody would complain about that he supported. So they brought in, they all were on message on a specific part. And then the fighters came in. And for most part, the fighters are not prepared. They can just voice discontent. I'm sure this was last minute. And also they're not people that spend their time discussing this a lot. I thought a few fighters, actually the best speaker, one was Eric Hamadi at the beginning, a listener of the show, had some great statements. I thought the 17-year-old Gabriel, I don't know his last name, a 17-year-old amateur fighter, was perhaps made the best case possible of anybody on that call. And I liked Matt Brown's, he was just his voicing disgust at the whole procedure. So some of them made good points, but they wasn't as polished, wasn't as organized as talking points as you could tell that the TKO, the people in support of the bill. And there were a few extra additional people that I don't think had any connection to TKO that called in. So they had those people as well, but the vast majority of people obviously had links to TKO. Just at the same time, I think the vast majority of the people opposing it were from MMA fighters, and I think they had connections, maybe not members of the MMAFA, but connections because of the current antitrust settlement. So, both camps, those are the only two groups that could really usher in troops at the last minute.
Was there any media representation for the opposing side?
For which side is the opposing side?
The people that opposed the bill.
Sternberg, is that how you pronounce his name? Sternberg on MMA or Bad Left Hook.
Bad Left Hook.
Formerly of MMA Mania. He had a comment, but he was the only one from the media that had any sort of any sort of voiced any opinion on the matter. Well, I guess Eric Hamidi has doesn't he have his own little podcast and stuff, and I want to call it little because who are we to talk, but I think he does his own show as well. So that was the media representation, and that was it really, compared to last time where Brunch Boxing called in and a few others called in. I think what Jake Donovan called in.
Mm-hmm.
But this time I think again it's like it was there was not as much forewarning about this one, and a lot of people assumed after the last one that this meeting would not happen until December. So I think a lot of people were caught off guard.
Now, the night before the meeting, the notes were released. The meeting notes were released, and their recommendation was already prepared, as though it didn't even matter what level of dissent or opposition was mounted. You stated on Twitter yourself, is the fix already in? What did you mean by that?
Well, it felt predestined that this was going to happen. And Luke Thomas on his chat today, I was watching that, and he almost said the exact same thing I was going to say, but much more urbane, eloquent, urbane, erudite, all that much better than I would have. So I should almost just replay his, but I don't have it queued up or anything. And in some ways I was thinking too, because it was a lot of the exact same talking points I want to make today. I go, did I already say this? And he's just ripping me off because there's no way it could be that exact, but I don't remember saying that. So I would suggest watch Luke's chat when he talks about the commission hearing, but I'm going to recite my similar opinion, almost identical to him. I thought that it seemed obvious that some sort of fix was in, because if you look at the recommendation that came out the night before the hearing, even though it was dated the same day as the meeting, the date on it's October 15, but the recommendation based on this is that the subcommittee recommends that the commission issue a formal statement of support for the bill, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, with strong recommendation to accept and amend the bill to include the recommendation of state-level cost of living increases for the minimum purses, and then they also recommend that there's caps and fees, capping fees for sanction organizations. And this is another important thing that not a lot of people I've seen brought up. I think MMA Draw brought this up. I think Zach Arnold brought this up. But they also they also want the collaboration of the governor's office with members of Congress to basically help them get the bill passed. And so you read that statement, and then you look at what happened, the way it was set up, where all these TKO individuals in support talked first, that they seemed to steer the direction of the conversation that direction, that they moved up this meeting that originally had a terrible backlash last time, said they're going to do a fact-finding mission. Then they come back a few weeks later and say, oh, we're ready for another vote, another meeting. When no one else is really prepared, no one else is really aware of it. It's just, they're obviously, it seems obvious that they're trying to get it under the radar. And then they vote for it in support. And then you look at what else is going on in the context. Why is it so important for California to support this bill? Well, it's not that important. It's a federal legislation that has to go to Congress. Shouldn't they be discussing it? Why is it important for California to rush out a vote in support of it? I mean, the bill does nothing really for California. As they mentioned, California already has a minimum purse per round higher than what the bill offers. California has the insurance requirements. The UBOs are different. And they do know, too, they want the TKO or Zuffa Boxing or UFC, one of them, to build one of the performance institutes in California. But that portion, but that's not the purpose of the bill is to protect boxers, not get performance institutes in your state. That's what you're supposed to be judging. So why are they in such a hurry to vote on this? And why would they want to have it pass? Well, right there, you can kind of see the reasoning is one, they might get a performance institute, but the other one is that the UFC is taking over the industry. They are taking over boxing. It looks like they already own MMA. Very few big events are held outside the UFC. Pro wrestling the same. And so state commissions that want big events, and big events are what pay their salaries. Big events are what pay the salaries of the inspectors and judges and referees. And the bigger the event, the bigger the title, the higher the payments are for those people. So they want these big events. Those big events are what they tax to do for the budget for the committee. And so you look at it, that's probably, you'd have to assume that's the incentive behind the commission trying to push this through so quick. And why would they want Cal?
And what do you call?
Well, that is technically, we could call that regulatory capture.
Yes,
that's
sir.
a pretty good example of regulatory capture. And that the fact that the regulatory bodies, instead of doing their job regulating this industry, instead they serve the industry because they're dependent on it for their own livelihoods. They're dependent on it to keep alive, to keep their departments alive. And so, but why would they, that makes sense why California would do it, but why are they doing this on behalf of Zuffa? What's the intent that they have to have this done right away for TKO and Zuffa Boxing? Well, they already leaked with the Tom Brown letter in support that Andy Foster suggested, that I asked for it. I got to release a copy of it. It shows the November 5th date that it was sent to a member of the Committee of Work and Education. Well, that suggests they're going to have a hearing on November 5th, they're planning, in D.C. about this bill, because we know they want to rush it through to get signed. And so, well, what is Zuffa Boxing lining up right now? Well, they have the ABC claiming they're supporting the bill, and we know that's not true. I've talked to members of the ABC. Many of them, most of them had no vote, have no knowledge about the bill before. Who voted for it was a board of directors, a small group of ABC commission members, including Andy Foster and Mike Mazzulli. And that small group voted for that, so they can go now to this hearing in Washington and show the Congress members that we have a bill that's introduced that's bipartisan because it has Democrat and Republican support. It has the support of the ABC, even though it doesn't really. The board of directors voted to support it, and they're going to claim the entire ABC supports it. We have the biggest state in the country, which does the most events, the California Athletic Commission, saying they support it. And we got the widow of Muhammad Ali, who the original Ali Act was named after, saying her deceased husband would have supported this bill. And I don't want to, knock her or anything, but I find it hard to believe that she knows what her husband would have wanted, considering she was not married to him while he was fighting. She married him afterwards. So it's not like she's a witness to his career during negotiations. She's a witness to his career afterwards. So, but anyways, all that gives it the aura that there's this mass support for this bill. And then when they get to Congress, they can just we already know basically all the Republicans will probably support it no matter what, because Donald Trump, good friends of Dana White, Ari Emanuel, and even Khan is a friend with members of the administration. He's going to make a phone call. Someone from the administration, maybe Stephen Chung, former employee of the UFC that now is an advisor to Donald Trump in the White House. They're going to make a phone call to the whips in Congress, and so almost every Republican is going to support it. And just a handful of Dems are needed, and they probably already got that. So that will get it through the House of Representatives, and then it goes on to the Senate. And if you have that support and the image, the visual that it looks like it has broad support, and it passes bipartisan vote in the House, there's not going to be enough interest. We already see we're not getting a lot of clamoring. We're not getting a lot of press coverage of this. We are not getting a lot of interest outside the bubble. Most fans are too casual to even know what's really happening, in which case there's going to be no pushback. And I think that's their expectation, that they can get through the House of Representatives, get it into the Senate, and quickly get a vote and get a number of Democrats to cross over and vote for it, or get a large number because there's just no pushback happening.
There have been people that are commenting on how no professional boxers called in, only MMA fighters. Why?
Well, I had a lot of questions about that as I stutter away here. And you did see, it's funny because you see a number of people in the industry push back at the idea that they should change the Ali Act, which this bill does. It changes the Ali Act. There's no way around it. But you look at, we had Danny Garcia was on a Hawaii show the other day, and he made a really great pitch about why you need the Ali Act. And I was thinking, like, you are saying this to Hawaii, why the California State Athletic Commission is having their meeting right now, that you could have been on the phone saying this exact same message to them. And maybe, I don't know if we would have got the California State Athletic Commission to vote differently, but it might have, in the same sense that it might have been, at least on the record, it would make it look worse what their vote was, but it also might have been, like, listen, we cannot publicly do a vote right now when major boxers are on the line, telling us why we need to preserve the Ali Act and why this is bad to change it. And then you have Oscar De La Hoya, who is talked against, and he said he wasn't aware of the vote. Eddie Hearn has been open about it. Bob Arum. So there's just a large number of people in boxing. And one is, I guess, there's two reasons I think they didn't call in for boxers and why it was all MMA fighters. I think one reason for boxers is a large number weren't aware of this. They just are, it was not big news. It was not something that everybody was prepared for. Is like, I do believe many of them, a lot of people I talked to had something to do at that time. They weren't aware this was going to happen. And by the time they found out, like, I have to go, I have a court hearing, I have a deposition or something. I have a meeting, I'm on a flight. So they could not participate. The other reason I think is a lot of people want to stay quiet. And because they do not want to anger this entity that they might have to work with. Right? They don't want to get on the bad side. We see what happens with UFC fighters when they get on the bad side of the UFC, when they own the marketplace. And so they're like, well, I might disagree with it, but I don't want to really cross the line. And I can verbally say it publicly, but I don't want to go into a meeting or a hearing and possibly deny them the vote and have them hold a grudge against me. And I think actually I'd add a third reason too is, I think a large number of people in boxing just did not assume that could really happen. They're just so used to the way boxing's working. They just works. They just, you've seen it again and again, people in media, even our friends of the show, friends, we got the guys from Brunch Boxing who we love. We got Fred Garvin. We got, there's, I think Jake Donovan and Alan Dawson and all these people in the boxing world who cover the sport. I think it just was their assumption that there just was not something that the TKO and Zuffa could come in and just roll over everybody. And I think it's just because it never happened in boxing before. And I think it's starting to dawn on them, something that people that are more versed in the UFC side of things and the MMA side, that this is a possibility, that this is much more possible than you probably think is likely. And I think that's also why we saw so many MMA fighters calling in, because I saw Errol Hawani, and I'm not going to rag on him for this. He was asking, it makes no sense. Why is there no boxers calling in, but all these MMA fighters? And my point to him on Twitter was because it's important to MMA fighters, and it's important for a couple of reasons. One is they're aware of how the UFC operates. If this type of action if there would have been a vote on this back, let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, no MMA fighter would have called in, because they wouldn't care. But after the antitrust lawsuit, after discovery, after these fighters are now getting checks, I think a lot of them have been radicalized about the UFC's operations. And that's why a lot of them called in. A lot of them too want the Ali Act extended to boxing after what they, after their experience going through this case. I know that for a fact. A lot of fighters that in the past would never think that's even a possibility or necessary or had no interest now thinks that the Ali Act should be expanded to include MMA. They would like to see those protections as well, because they realize how little we as MMA fighters traditionally have made compared to boxers for same type of event revenue, as Eddie Hearn always points out. And so a lot of these fighters would like to see it expanded to MMA, the Ali Act. And if this bill goes through, well, it guts all the protections they would like to see the Ali Act be, all the protections they want to see extended from the Ali Act to include into MMA. What's the point of expanding MMA, Ali Act coverage to MMA if it doesn't expand the coverage, if it doesn't give you any protections because you've gutted the protection? So that's another reason why a lot of them called in. And finally, I don't know how many this was the reason, but I know some are aware of this, is if they change the Ali Act and make federal legislation allow for UBO models, well, that puts the Phil Davis suit at some risk. And the Phil Davis, because the Phil Davis suit, if you're not aware, Phil Davis v. Zuffa is one of the current ongoing antitrust complaints that was filed against the UFC that they're seeking class action for. And that case cites numerous times the legislative history of the Ali Act. It cites the Ali Act and the legislative history as an example of actions that cause monopoly, because in the legislative history of the Ali Act, they explain these behaviors lead to monopolization, and that's why we want to ban them in boxing. So they can cite that. Well, if you have a UBO that makes this legal in boxing, it's harder to cite that because you are citing something that's no longer says leads to monopolization. You're citing something that federal legislation says is acceptable because it's a different model, a different choice for the fighters. And so that puts the Phil Davis suit at risk. And why is that important? Well, if you're a fighter in the Johnson v. Zuffa case, the second class action antitrust case that's ongoing, that takes up where the Lee case ended, and you want a settlement, you want some money like the Lee guys did, and you're worried perhaps you might not get that money because you signed an arbitration agreement and class action waiver. Well, the best chance probably to get that class action waiver and antitrust and arbitration agreement thrown out is to get the UFC to throw it out themselves in a settlement for the Davis case, because the Davis case is asking only for injunctive relief, something the UFC doesn't want to do. So the threat to current fighters is if that Davis case is thrown away, that's a major piece of leverage the plaintiffs have, the fighters have, to kind of compel the UFC to settle quickly instead of dragging the case out forever, and also to settle in a way that probably includes arbitration agreement and class action waivers, fighters that sign those that are right now excluded from the case and so would not get any money. And so those fighters that sign those that would want maybe a check like the Lee guys or another check if they got one in the Lee class, I could see why they would have interest in making sure that this bill does not pass.
What were the most notable parts of the meeting? The best part and the worst part?
Well, the best on the people that were against supporting the act. I mentioned already. One was Gabriel, the 17-year-old boxer. Hamadi, too, our listener. I do enjoy when a listener calls. And he did point out he was going to...
It's Eric Hamidi. Yeah.
I apologize, Hamidi. I really apologize for getting your name wrong there. I am, as you know, as a listener of the show, you know I am terrible with names, so you should be able to forgive me on that. Hamidi. And I noticed he got cut off by them, but he was going to bring up a lot of the stuff we brought up on the show. And I had a tear in my eye thinking about that if he could have got through all the points I had laid out, that'd have been great. And I really like I said before, Matt just saying this is a joke. And, he wasn't the most, sophisticated speaker, Matt. He fumbled with his words, which I can empathize with. But I did like his basically calling out the whole thing as a sham. I thought that was great. Now, the most interesting on the other side was, again, we pointed out the order that everybody from the UFC called in, or from TKO, that no one brought up the UBOs. And the other one was that Big John McCarthy called in, and Chris Lieben. And Big John McCarthy called in and laid out the facts that if you're against this bill, you're being paid off. You're a paid off shill. That you have a financial interest. I can't remember his exact wording, but that was kind of the gist of it. That there's another motivation for those that are opposed to this bill, which I guess the motivation for Big John obviously doesn't have any additional motivation. He has no motivations other than supporting what's right for fighters. Never mind that he was a guy that thought there was no merit to the antitrust case. He will say he's out there always looking out for the fighters and wants the best for them. But Never mind, for years, he thought they didn't deserve any check from that. Never mind, too, that he's now re-entering, exiting the weighing in show and is going to go back to refereeing and possibly working big shows in California. Never mind, he has friends, police officers and such, that are work on the side as part of the athletic commission in California that maybe will make some big money, too, going to do TKO shows in California. So obviously there's no other reason why he would support this. And the same with Chris Lieben. There's no direct financial incentive for him to support this bill other than the fact that he might make more doing a side job. So that was the other part I found pretty interesting.
Afterwards, Zuffa Boxing sent out a press release where Nick Khan stressed how the new bill doesn't change the Ali Act at all, but instead offers the boxers a choice. Can you explain why this isn't really true?
It's such a canard. It's a talking point, so we got to give them credit. They stick to that talking point. And technically, I guess it's true because it doesn't change a word of the portion that was already introduced called the Ali Act. But as Pat English explained, and Pat English, I should know too, was a person that was going to call in if he was able to, but they scheduled at a time he could not call in. So there's another person that was kind of caught off guard by this. But as Pat English explained, the Professional Health and the Boxing Health and Safety Act was the original bill. The Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act was an amendment to that previous bill, and so it just added to that. This bill, which they claim does not touch the Ali Act, well, it does because it's an addition to the first bill amending the other two. So it's a canard when it says it does not do anything with the Ali Act. In fact, it has two portions of it that I guess would be grouped into the Ali Act, which is that the insurance coverage portion and also the minimum purses, I believe, are being grouped as in the sections that belong in the Ali Act. So that would be right there a change. And the UBOs, the Unified Boxing Organizations, that addition to the bill, well, I guess you could say it doesn't change the Ali Act, but it does say that anybody that is in a UBO is not the rest of the Ali Act doesn't apply to the Ali Act sections. So it's a carve out that completely eliminates the protections of the Ali Act. And, you could, I guess you could say the other argument they say is, well, it really is just creating another path, an alternative. It gives fighters an option. It doesn't, you can choose to go the Ali Act route or the UBO route. It's all up to the fighters. But in some ways, that would be like saying, as a worker, we are going to go to a state and say, companies, you have a choice. You do not have to follow the National Labor Relations Act or the FLSA or FSA, any labor protections that they passed during the New Deal era, or you can go to a company that follows those acts, those protections. And workers might say, well, I have more protections with all these organizations during the New Deal era. I'm going to go to that and to those businesses. But at the same time, the other companies could perhaps offer more wages. In fact, they might be able to pay you more. They might have more money available because they don't have all these regulations they have to follow. But down the line, lo and behold, you might want those regulations in place later, right? At some point, you might want those if your boss is suddenly, treating you like an indentured servant. You would hope to have some labor protection. So in many ways, that's like that. They're saying that we are the National Labor Relations Act and all the other 1930s employment acts. We're going to make it so that you can choose to work for a company that follows or a company that doesn't. It's all up to you. That sounds good on paper, but when you get into it, you lose a lot when you sacrifice those protections. And workers might freely choose to accept to go to work for the place that does not have those protections. But as we know with with the frictions you see at low wage workers often that they have to choose in the immediate, which is what's best for the immediate, and down the line they're hurt. So I think that is an absolute canard, just a silly argument, but it's one that's working because people repeat it constantly that it's just a choice. It's just an option.
Now, there's some people on Twitter that are arguing that Zuffa Boxing is just doing what Al Heyman and PBC did. Are they correct?
In some ways, there is some similarity, but not at all in other ways. I think the big thing that it does drive me a little nuts because I have noticed. Now, people go back; they will know when PBC did their effort to get on all the time buys. I did voice my concern repeatedly at the time that I was concerned that they were going to try to monopolize boxing at this. Their intent was to push the other promotions out of business, and also with the rumors at the time that they were potentially having their own title, which would be a violation of the Ali Act. I was very much against that. Now, since then, there's two stories I heard. One is that PBC had no intent to have their own title. That was something that Fox wanted to introduce and mentioned it to someone in the media who put it out there, and everybody freaked out. But I have heard from other people at Fox that said, yes, PBC, or probably more specifically, Waddell and Reed floated that idea, which would make sense for them, that Waddell and Reed would probably think PBC should have their own title. But we never got that far. And, those people used to freak out about Heyman constantly, that he's violating the Ali Act, and we'll get in some of the ways he did not violate the Ali Act, even though it appeared he did. He's trying to introduce his own titles. He's doing all this stuff. And lo and behold, Dana White and Zuffa Boxing shows up and are doing a lot of the stuff that everybody was accusing Al Heyman of doing. In fact, going much further than the accusations against Al Heyman ever went. And they seem very excited by the fact that they are planning to take over boxing, where they were very offended by Al Heyman. I have to question why that is. I can't possibly see any reason why the black Al Heyman would be the person that they would be very alarmed by, but they'd be very excited by Dana White. I can't think of any possible reason as I go back to the show at hand. But Al Heyman, he technically did violate the Ali Act in some ways. I mean, people said he violated the promoter manager situation. And, on paper, it does look that way. But what he did is he created this position advisor, and then they would just he would have the boxers hire the promoter to be, they would say it's just a shill promotion. It's a paper promotion that they were set up and had no real power. But that's true. But it was a loophole he was taking advantage of. And the other thing he was doing was he was setting up a company the way he used the boxers, and often he would have boxers turn down good deals from other promoters to stay with PBC. But, people look at that and say, oh, he's not, in some ways he probably might not be looking out for that boxer's individual best interest. But the thing Al Heyman is famous for is paying his boxers a lot. And the difference between Al Heyman's plan, which this part I actually really liked about Heyman's plan, he basically had organized his boxers into a cartel, the closest thing you could have to an association or union. He collectively sold his fighters, his boxers, to get an increased purse for all of them. And then the way the plan was to make money was not to suppress pay for his fighters, but actually to keep their pay up because they would get a percentage of that. Now, that seems to be the opposite of what TKO is doing, which is following, or Zuffa Boxing, which is following the UFC model, which is to set up a system where you can suppress the athlete pay, and then the promotion itself can make a lot more money. That's very different, and that's the part I find even more alarming about TKO than I did about Al Heyman and PBC. Is that they seem intent on one, only using their own guys, demanding that they sign with them exclusively. You got to remember too, when Al Heyman had these advisor deals, there were many boxers that were not signed to Al Heyman as clients that were on those cards, headlining those cards. He would use guys in PBC that, were not under his umbrella, the Al Heyman umbrella of his clients. These were just boxers they brought in because they were the top boxers, and he would use anybody. But Zuffa Boxing wants to only work with people exclusively signed to Zuffa Boxing. Possibly, I'm sure we'll talk later, possibly signed to some advisor firm, just a long string of connections to Zuffa Boxing. And it also, my guess would be that by controlling the title and rank and the way they're setting it up, is they want to follow a UFC model where they can get massive broadcast rights in the future and limit, instead of paying the fighters a ton of money and get a percentage of what they're making by getting them as much as possible, which could hurt other promoters, because you could be an advisor to a group of fighters and basically monopolize the sport and make sure all the fighters make tremendous amount of money, but get a percentage of it. So you're also making a tremendous amount of money, versus monopolize the sport and then suppress the wages of your fighters who are even making more money than the previous. And we know that was part of the plan too, because people know in the internal emails, one discussion was about these broadcast deals when there was no pay-per-view was we have to have some sort of wage split like the other professionals.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!